Hi guys, so I'm going to take a look at OpenAI's Whisper model. Now, this is a fairly sophisticated transcription model. Basically, it takes audio files or audio streams and converts that into some kind of text. And that transcribed text should represent what's embedded in that sound file. So if I'm speaking English, I would hope that it produces some kind of text output with English words that's coherent when I read the transcribed text. Now, any transcription is not going to be perfect because we don't necessarily speak in the way that we write. Sometimes we speak in fragments, or we insert things like and and yeah, and those kinds of things that do get transcribed as part of the transcription. So with the transcribed text, for you to use that in something other than just reading it as part of a conversation, you need to clean it up, so to speak. And to do that, what you can use is another model like GPT 3.5. So my idea with this is to transcribe me talking to a computer about what I want to put into my novels. So rather than type my novels like I typically do, I've always wanted to maybe talk to the computer and just kind of dictate to the computer what's going on in my head as the story unfolds in my mind. So that would capture all of the description. It would also capture all of the dialogue. Now, a transcribed audio isn't going to be able to tell me the difference between what is purely descriptive and what is also dialogue, but ChatGPT can detect that kind of thing. So what I need to do is take the audio file, send it to Whisper, get the transcribed text, pass it to GPT, and let GPT format that in a way that looks like a story, and then send that back to me. So that's my goal with the app. So I'm going to briefly walk through kind of the architecture of how all this is going to work, and then I'll look through the code, and then I'll try to demo it just to see how well it works. And I'll be honest, it's kind of crude right now, but I think I can refine it a little bit more to make it even better. And as I refine it, I think I will be able to actually use this for writing certain kinds of prose that I typically do, which is mostly fiction. So let's just go right over to the architecture and take a look at that, and then we'll look at the code and then a demo. So this is how I envision this working. I'm going to have me, that's going to be the user, speaking, and I'm going to be speaking into a microphone that's attached to a computer, which in this case will be this microphone. And the computer will be running some sort of client software. In this case, I'll be using a browser. Now, the browser has an API that can capture audio. You can capture an audio stream and stream it back to a server. That's how a lot of those online chat clients work. Or you can just build a memory buffer, and then when you are done, you can take that memory buffer and save it to some kind of file. In my case, I'm going to be using that approach. I'm going to be using the OGG format, which is a good alternative to MP3s because it's open source and you don't run into licensing issues or compatibility issues with things like browsers or server-side tech. In this case, I can save it to an OGG file, then take that OGG file and upload it to a server and not have to worry about dealing with MP3s at that point. And most server-side technology supports OGG as well. In this case, my server is really just the same box I'm running the browser on, but I could run this on a more appropriate server if I wanted to create a true application out of this. And the server is also going to be running the Whisper model. Now, I wrote this little application using some Python code, and the Python is going to basically receive the upload from my client, which is my browser, and then it's going to pass it into Whisper, which is self-hosted. Now, when you're hosting Whisper, you can run the application. If you've never installed the model, it will download it the first time you attempt to use the model, and thereafter you will just use the downloaded version that you currently have. And it will take the audio file and run it through the model and then produce some kind of raw text. Now, the raw text is not going to have the appropriate capitalization and punctuation and all that kind of stuff that you would typically want within the context of a formatted document. So to get that, I'm going to pass that raw text over to GPT-3.5 on Azure. And what I want to do with GPT-3.5 in Azure is do some prompt engineering to tell it what I'm trying to do with this. And basically, I'm going to tell it to say, hey, take this transcribed text. It's just a bunch of words. It might have some punctuation in it, and it's going to have a lot of other things inserted into it. But I want it to convert that into something that's formatted like a story. So it's going to have paragraphs of description and dialogue tags and things like that that will then be formatted in an appropriate way. And then once it's done formatting that, it will send it back to the calling server, which in my case is the same one hosting Whisper, and then that will pass it back to the client, and then the client can then read the transcribed text and also see what it looks like when it's formatted. So these are the parts that I envision, and I'm going to be using two different kinds of AI to make this happen. I'm going to be using the hosted Whisper model right here, and then I'm going to be using GPT-3.5 on Azure. Now, there are LLMs that I could host locally, but I wanted to use 3.5 on Azure because it's really fast there, and it's fairly inexpensive too. I can call it using the transcribe text as well as some additional context for my intended purpose, and hopefully I'll get back some kind of intelligent document, and I can then compare the output to the transcribed text. I know what I said, obviously, but having all three of these available will make for an interesting use case for AI and how you can use different models together. So let's take a look at this code. It's pretty straightforward code. There's not a lot going on here. I have basically two buttons on the UI. One's to start the recording, one's to stop the recording. Start basically starts the audio stream, and then stop stops it. And once you stop it, it encodes it and then sends it up to the endpoint for transcription. So the code that handles all that is down here. You can see that it's wiring up a handler for the stream from the audio. So once you click that start record button, it's just putting it into a memory buffer. That's what this audio chunks.push is doing. And then once you hit the stop button, it takes all those audio chunks right there and writes an OGG file, and then it sends that up to the server. And that's what this part right here does. And it's just using the fetch API to upload it as form data. So it's uploading a file essentially, and then once it gets the results from that back, it populates some elements on the screen for the transcribed text as well as the formatted text. So the server audio side is pretty straightforward as well. It's a Flask app, which is an embedded web server for Python apps, and it's using Whisper and OpenAI. OpenAI is pretty straightforward. It's got some configuration that you'll need to put in here, and I'm using the Azure version of this, and I'm putting my API key in there, and then I have a deployment up on Azure called AI Dictate. That's a part of my account for this, and that deployment allows me to have multiple deployments in the context of Azure, and that one is set up to use GPT 3.5, and then it's using a static directory to serve up that HTML we just looked at. There's the model that I'm using for Whisper. You can use several tiers of Whisper. You can use a large, medium, small, t-shirt size type model, and with that you can have more sophistication with a larger model, but you need a more CPU, more RAM for that to work. If you're using something like a phone or something like that, use a smaller model. And then this is the endpoint to transcribe. It's pretty straightforward. It basically receives the file and then saves it to a temp file right here. And with that temp file, it goes and gets the transcribed results from the file that you saved, and then removes the file. Then it prints the results back, and then it calls the OpenAI endpoint. And this is just using some prompt engineering that says this is a passage filled. It's basically telling you're an AI assistant to transcribe text from a novelist speaking into a computer. Take the transcribed text and change it to the tone of a novel. Do not add text. Try to preserve the text as much as possible. Use the following rules to guide the style. And it's saying you make it dramatic, straightforward, and urgent, descriptive, narrative, and emotional. These are just some keywords that you can put into the system role in the GPT configuration that provide context for the audio transcription that you're providing. And then once you send that audio transcription up, it's basically going to tell OpenAI, here, use these different rules to apply them to the text that was transcribed, and then it will do the GPT thing and then produce some kind of output. And then that output will have something that will then be sent back to the server right here, and then it just returns that as part of a JSON payload back to the HTML, which then displays it on the screen, and then the user can read it. So pretty straightforward code, but let's just go see how it works in action. It's actually really straightforward in action too, and it actually works fairly well in its current state, but I could probably refine it some more. All right, let's go ahead and start this app. I'm going to be using Python in the Linux context, so I'm going to start this using Python 3 app .py. I like the Linux context for Python because it seems to be a little bit more compatible, and I'm using WSL2 here. So let's go ahead and start this up. It's going to load the endpoint. And all right, everything's active. I'm good to go. So this is the app. Let's make sure it's reloading. If I hit start record, it's going to start recording it. So I'm going to hit start record, flip over to my text, which is basically the three little pigs, at least one version of it. I'm going to read that and then hit stop record and then see how this works. So let's hit start record. Once upon a time, there was an old mother pig who had three little pigs and not enough food to feed them. So when they were old enough, she sent them out into the world to seek their fortunes. The first little pig was very lazy. He didn't want to work at all, and he built his house out of straw. The second little pig worked a little bit harder, but was somewhat lazy too, and he built his house out of sticks. And then they sang and danced and played together for the rest of the day. The third little pig worked hard all day and built his house with bricks. It was a sturdy house, complete with a fine fireplace and chimney. It looked like it could withstand the strongest winds. The next day, a wolf passed by the lane where the three little pigs lived, and he saw the straw house, and he smelled the pig inside. He thought the pig would make a mighty fine meal, and his mouth began to water. So he knocked on the door and said, little pig, let me in, let me in." But the little pig saw the wolf's big paw through the keyhole, so he answered back, "No, no, no, not by the hair of my chinny chin chin." So I hit stop record, and now we should see transcription happen and then get the adaptation back. So here we go. Let's see what this looks like. Oh, it captured the last time it said record. And so once upon a time, the mother pig had three little pigs and not enough food to feed them, so she went out on her own to seek their fortunes. Her little pig, her pig was very lazy and didn't want to work at all. And then let's look at this adaptation. Once upon a time, there was a faraway land in the sun-raked caressed fields. There lived an old mother pig. She found herself burdened by three little pigs with a meager supply of food and the growing appetites. With a heavy heart, she made a difficult decision to send him out onto the world. And the first pig, oh, what an idle and indolent he was. He filled his, with his aversion label, he built his abode out of a more fragile straw and a pitiful shell of protection. So this is kind of elaborating on it a little bit more than I would like it to. So you can see that the ChatGPT did clean it up a little bit. Let's look at the dialogue. That's one thing that I wanted to see if it did. So he raised his paw and demanded an interest, and with a smile on his prying lips, and says, "Oh, little pig, he crooned with his voice dripping with benevolence. Let me in, little in." But the pig was wise in the wolf's wicked ways and peered through the keyholes, and a sliver of panic etched in his face. He gathered the courage and retorted with a voice infused with defiance. He said, "Oh, no, by the hair of my chinny chin." The drama thickened as the stakes raising as each passing moment. So I would probably need to refine the prompt a little bit, but overall, this is working actually really well. But I think I could refine the prompt a little bit better to get better results from this. I don't like the way that it's adding a lot of ad-libbing a little bit on this thing to add in commentary and things like that. But I think with some better prompt engineering, I could probably clean this up a little bit and get a better result than this. But it did recognize the dialogue. It did get a lot of the details right from the mess that this is, which is the just raw transcription from what I sent up by way of recording it using start and stop recording. So again, very neat way to use AI in a local context as well as hosted on Azure, and certainly something that I think I'm going to work on this a little bit. I'll probably end up using it for something, depending on how well I can get it to work. So that's the demo and the code that we've seen already. So if you like this content, please like and subscribe and all that stuff. I'll be making this code available kind of when I'm done with it. I'll put it up on a GitHub repo, and I'll link that in the video description down below. You can definitely check that out. But in any case, thanks for watching as always, and look forward to more content around AI and other kinds of use cases related to similar kind of things that we've been doing over the last several videos with AI. If you like this content, please consider subscribing to the channel by clicking on the subscribe button. You can also like this content by clicking on the thumbs up, or share this content with your friends, and also comment in the comment section down below. You can also find me online at www.blaze.net or on Twitter at @TheOneMule. And as always, thanks for watching.